Welcome and thank you guys for joining us either via Zoom or Facebook Live. I'm Kylie Gunkopf with Kirkwood Corporate Training. We're so excited to have you all with us today for another great webinar. Today we have Dr. Dan Ebener with us again. He is the owner of Plasticity Leadership Consulting and a professor of leadership at St. Ambrose University. Dr. Dan Ebener just finished writing his 5th leadership book, Leadership for the Greater Good, a textbook for leaders. And this book will be released in a couple of weeks, so be looking out for that. Today's webinar is based on that book and is part 2 to a 2-part series on adaptive leadership. Today focuses on emotional skills for leadership. I just want to do a quick reminder for our Zoom users. Feel free to submit questions throughout today's presentation. We will do a live Q&A session with Dan after our presentation. And we will also be sending out a recording of today's session. And feel free to share that with others. We will also add the recording to our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube channel as well. So thank you again for joining us. Dan, we are so excited to have you here. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kylie. I've been just enjoying this picture that I took several years ago when I was in Germany at a place called Kassel, Germany, where my ancestors come from. And it's just great to see the ground. I don't think I've seen the ground for like 6 or 7 weeks in Davenport. And it's great to see summer. It gives me hope that maybe someday we'll get beyond this frigid weather and all this ice and snow, and we'll get back to spring and then summer and enjoy the outdoors, right? Which is, by the way, this is something related to our topic because, you know, one of the ways that we improve our emotional intelligence is actually through getting plenty of fresh air and exercise. So once the weather is a little more conducive to that, I can't wait to get back outside. So today I'm here to talk about the intersection between emotions and leadership. And you might wonder, well, you know, how can these two things possibly be connected? Well, first of all, leadership, as I define it, is about change, okay? The world desperately needs change. And when you're leading change, you're going to get emotional responses. The most likely emotion, the one that we hear the most of, is fear of change, okay? That it's said that in the Bible, there are 365 places where the Bible says, be not afraid, okay? And I think that's an interesting number since it's enough for once for every day of the year, right? And when you're leading change, it's like that's one of the messages, you know, that you have to be aware of is that people are afraid of change. They're going to fear change. They're going to be afraid of, you know, what's coming next. And so when you're leading change, you really have to tap into and be tuned into the emotions of the other person. All right, so remember that in leadership, anyone can lead. It's not a position of authority. It's not a title. It's not a promotion. Leadership is an activity. It's a choice that you make when you decide to influence and invite others into a process that brings about adaptive change. So here's my definition of leadership, all right? Notice on the left side, the arrows are going both ways because the communication between leaders and followers needs to go in both directions, okay? So it's a voluntary and interactive relationship between leaders and followers that intends to bring about some kind of adaptive change. So adaptive change is when we try to bring about some kind of change in the way we're thinking or the way we're acting. It can be a change in attitude. It could be changing the culture of our organization, policies, procedures, structures, strategy. Those are the things of leadership. So on the relationship side, leadership involves this interdependence between leaders and followers that's completely based on trust. Just look at this picture. You can see between these two students of mine from Croatia that, you know, you can tell that there's a positive relationship here, right? There's an openness in this communication. They're making eye contact. We're going to talk about some of the neurochemicals that are present when you make good eye contact and you have a positive facial expression. And this is what you need in order to build trust, which is the basis of leadership. Without trust, there can be no collaboration, and without collaboration, there's no leadership. So adaptive challenges, what we mean by that are the kind of challenges in the workplace that cry out for leadership. These are the kinds of challenges where there's no technical fix or easy solution, okay? It's things like changing the culture and the attitude of the people we're trying to lead, or the behaviors, the actions of our group. because the world has changed in such a way that it's created more adaptive challenges and fewer of the challenges in the workplace require a technical fix, this change in society, this change in our workplaces is requiring more dialogical leadership. It's requiring the kind of communication that goes in multiple directions. So we need to move away from the kind of management of command and control that only gets us to compliance. And we need to move more in the direction of inviting, influencing, engaging people, inspiring them in ways that build trust and collaboration. So one of the ways we do this, and I've trained hundreds of people now in this humble inquiry, is to identify adaptive challenges in our workplace and the solutions to those adaptive challenges. We practice what we call humble inquiry. A humble conversation is based on these three qualities, okay? First of all, it's curiosity. Now, this book, Leading with Questions, really gets at the science of asking the right questions that can generate an openness on the part of the other person and demonstrates curiosity on your part that you really care about what the other person thinks. So open-ended questions, they wake people up. They prompt new conversations that discover new ways of thinking about things, okay? And it helps us, by asking questions, it helps us admit to other people that we don't have all the answers. Because by definition, adaptive challenges are not ones that have easy solutions. And so if we're gonna find these solutions, we have to admit to other people, hey, I don't have all the answers, which just gets us to humility, okay? Humility literally means to be fully human. It means to be grounded in the reality that you have your own human strengths and your human weaknesses. It's knowing yourself from an honest, objective perspective. That's being humble. And then the third quality for humble inquiry is empathy, all right? So empathy literally means to feel inside of the other person, to take on the pain of another person in such a way that they know that you're identifying with what you're asking them to go through. So when we're leading change, we need to be able to identify with sometimes the fear or the anger or the sadness that sometimes is generated by the change that we're trying to lead. So 5 levels of listening that are a part of these humble conversations. First of all, at the bottom end, right, this is not the way we want to listen, but a lot of times we start by listening from our biased perspective, okay? We have our own way of thinking about things, and that's the way we're listening to hear the story that we want to hear instead of really honestly listening to what they're saying. The second thing is distracted listening, right? So distracted listening is so common in our society today, particularly with cell phones, computers, and all these devices that we have that distract us from living in the present moment, right? So listening requires that we live in the present moment and that we're actively listening by opening our mind to new ideas, opening our eyes to see things anew, opening our ears to really hear what the other person is trying to express. And then empathetic listening, this is where you're opening your heart to try to empathize with what the other person is saying. This is really the emotional intelligence part where you're connecting emotionally with the other person. And then opening your will, generative listening, this means that you're willing to change your behaviors based on what the other person is saying and doing and feeling about the change that you're trying to lead. So listening, it's a solo task, folks. If you're multitasking, if you're doing 2 or 3 things at once, and one of the tasks is supposed to be listening, then you're not really listening, okay? You're not really listening. Multitasking, all the neuroscientific research is showing, is not healthy for our brains. It causes a higher cognitive load on our brains. It causes this overflow of input into the brain that actually lowers the productivity and power of your brain, okay? All the neuroscientific research is showing us that multitasking is not healthy for our brains, particularly when we're trying to listen. So try to practice solo tasking, all right? In fact, research is showing that actually the brain can only do one conscious activity at a time. So when you're multitasking, what you're really doing is you're forcing the brain into one activity in a microsecond here, and then another activity in the next microsecond. And And you're forcing the brain to go back and forth between multiple activities instead of being able to focus on one thing at a time, which is healthy brain function, okay? This particular author, David Rock, he suggests that the brain is kind of like a major theater. Think of like the brain is a big theater. And in this theater, you have a stage, and then you have millions of people in the audience, okay? And you can only put one person on the stage, he says, at a time, which means basically that you can only hold one idea in your brain at a time, okay? So it might be for a microsecond, but these are the 5 activities that the brain can actually do, okay? You can try to understand something, okay? That's where you take somebody from out of the audience, you put them on the stage, and you try to connect that person to other members of the audience. So by connecting one idea to another, you try to understand something. Or making a decision. You're putting one idea up on the stage and comparing that idea to another idea to try to weigh the pros and cons of a decision. Or when you try to recall somebody's name, or you're trying to recall an idea, okay, this is where you actually bring an audience member from the audience onto the stage for a moment to try to recall. You're trying to think of a word or a phrase or a name. Memorizing, that's where you basically move actors on and off the stage and into the audience to try to remember them. Or inhibiting, this is what takes the most brain power, is trying to actually keep a certain actor from entering on the stage. Read, for example, Don't Think of an Elephant, okay, a book about how difficult it is to inhibit a thought. So the bottom line here is that multitasking is going to create all this extra cognitive load on your brain in such a way that lowers your productivity. All right. So the big thing in today's workforce is how do we engage people, right? I hear this from CEOs all the time who, you know, when I'm talking about doing leadership trainings, they'll say, you know, I want my people to lead, not manage. We need our workers to be engaged. And the research is all showing that 70 to 80% of people are not engaged in the workforce, okay? And some of the ways that we can improve engagement is to look at the brain and how it functions, okay? Research shows that people and their brains are longing for a sense of purpose, okay? A sense of purpose or meaning. Why is this work important? A sense of direction. Where are we going as an organization? Where is this work going to take us? What's the big picture involved in the work that I'm trying to do? And the brain and people are also looking for a sense of connection, okay? We want to be connected, one person to another. The brain actually hungers for these 3 things: purpose, direction, and connection. And they all, when you can lead people in these with these triggers, you're going to increase worker engagement, and you're going to increase intrinsic motivation, okay? People who are engaged are intrinsically motivated. People who are intrinsically motivated are going to do above and beyonds, okay? Ken Thomas talks about 4 ways that you can intrinsically motivate people. You can give them a sense of purpose and meaning in their work. You can give them some choice in what you know, like for example, finding ways that, you know, you can match up their work with things that they're good at, you know, like strengths finders. People are intrinsically motivated when they see themselves growing in competence in a certain skill, or when they're making progress toward goals, okay? These are ways that you can intrinsically motivate people. Extrinsic motivation, which is, you know, all right, this is rewards and punishments. It basically will give you enough to get by. But if you want the above and beyonds, you got to figure out ways to intrinsically motivate people. And to do that, we have to look at how the brain works and how emotions enter into the interaction in the workplace. So let's take a look at EI, emotional intelligence. So first of all, biological factors drive our emotions. People who say we need to take emotions out of the workplace, okay, that's impossible. There's no biological way of taking emotions out of the interactions in our workplace. We'll get into that in a minute, okay? The research actually shows that EI has gone from something that's nice to have to something that you need to have. In fact, research with human resource managers are showing how important EI is to the workplace, that this is something they're beginning to try to figure out how to interview for. The people skills, the emotional skills, Rather than just hiring people for their technical skills and figuring we're going to improve their people skills. No, sometimes it's easier to actually train them on the technical skills. So interview for people skills and figure, ways to develop the technical skills after you get people. This is a new strategy in HR management. Self-aware people have to recognize how their emotions are impacting their work. So for example, know what your triggers are. If deadlines bring out the worst in you, okay, then be mindful of that. Be conscious and aware of that and try not to procrastinate, but to do work in advance so you don't put your brain in that situation of feeling the stress of a deadline that's coming up right now. Another thing research is showing is that cross-cultural dialogue, okay, which by the way is more necessary in today's workplace because we have more cultures in the workplace, right? We have a lot of multicultural diversity in our workplace, and this is requiring more of the kind of dialogue that requires emotional intelligence. And then finally, empathy needed for the retention of talent. Okay, research is showing that when people don't feel connected, they don't feel like anyone's empathizing with what they're doing, they're more likely to leave. Okay, so as a team leader, you need to be able to sense and understand the emotions of your team. So other research, this one, 188 companies studied, they found that 90% of the difference from leaders who succeeded and didn't was made up on emotional intelligence factors. It shows that EI improves with age, but only if you take the time to reflect on your emotions and your experiences and try to draw some kind of wisdom, some kind of new meaning from that experience. Research is showing that the limbic system learns best when, through motivation, practice, and feedback. So when you're trying to improve on your emotional intelligence, ask people to give you feedback. You need that feedback in order to really practice the better skills. Most trainings in emotional intelligence focus on the wrong part of the brain, okay? So after this workshop, it's really important for you to try to reflect on what did you learn from this and how can you practice things differently to actually improve your emotional intelligence. So just learning about this is not going to help so much, okay? It's when you take the time to reflect on what we're talking about this morning that you can actually grow in your emotional intelligence. And more empathy is needed in the world today because we're doing more work in teams. There's more cultural diversity. Globalization is requiring a lot more emphasis on the people skills and less on the technical skills that we tend to hire for right now. All right, so emotional intelligence. It teaches us, first of all, that emotions are a force for motivation, okay? Emotion, motivation. They come from the same root word, motive, to move, okay? To move. In order to move people, you have to tap into their emotions. Watch a football game. If one team is very emotional, okay, and has the adrenaline that comes from those emotions, they're going to perform much better than a team that's playing kind of blasé, right? Okay, emotions are also essential for good judgment. Your emotions actually trigger in your conscience when your brain thinks you're doing something wrong, okay? So emotions can actually trigger a chemical reaction in your body when you're doing something that your brain says, no, this is not moral, this is not right. Emotions are also a sign of vitality. We're going to talk about some of the chemicals that are released by the limbic system of your brain, the emotional center of your brain, okay, that give you a sense of vitality, okay? And also at the same time, they actually enhance reason. We usually think of reason and emotion as being opposites, but emotion can actually enhance reason because emotions can trigger the chemicals that can increase consciousness, awareness, awakeness, alertness, so that we can reason better. Emotions are also the foundation of trust, okay? Oxytocin is the actual chemical that has to be present in order for trust to exist. And oxytocin is released by the limbic system of the brain, the emotional center. It's also a spark for creativity. So you become more creative when you have norepinephrine in your body, okay? Or when you have serotonin. We have some of these chemicals that actually stimulate the creativity in your brain. And so it's also a signal for morality. Okay, so emotions do all of these things. They create a sense of urgency when you as a leader need to create a sense of urgency about what you're trying to change. Bottom line here, emotional quotient, your EQ, okay, this is how you measure EI. Your EQ is a higher predictor of workplace success, according to the research by Daniel Goleman, than your IQ. Okay, so here's the 4 pieces of emotional intelligence. So first of all, there's self-awareness or mindfulness, living in the current moment and being aware of your emotions as you're experiencing them. The second would be being aware of the emotions of other people. This is empathy, being able to identify with what other people are going through. This becomes really important in leadership because you have to be able to identify with the emotional reactions that people are going through when you're bringing about change. Okay. The third piece is self-control. Okay. How well can you control your behaviors when you're having an emotional reaction, particularly when you're having a negative emotional reaction like anger, sadness, or fear? Okay. How well can you control your behaviors in that moment? And then fourthly, the social skills. How well do you handle the emotional reactions of other people in the room? Okay. The bottom line here is that we can change. Okay. This is really the good news. This is the best news of my presentation, is that research shows that the human brain is changeable. They call this the neuroplasticity of the brain, that the mind actually can change the brain. We can practice mind over matter, mind over brain. So let's talk about mind and brain, what that means. So the brain is the physical organ, right? So you have your reptilian brain, okay? This is the sympathetic or parasympathetic, right? This is where basically you want the parasympathetic, where your amygdala is more rested, it's more relaxed, as opposed to, being on a hair trigger alert, okay? And this is your fight or flight mechanism, okay? The mammalian brain, this is your limbic system, your emotional center. It's also where your memories are. So every memory that you have is connected to an emotion, okay? So when, like for example, when you remember a song in your head, okay, that's going to trigger emotions for you. And when you actually hear a song, that also is going to trigger the same emotions, okay? So songs and sights, all of your senses, all the sensory information that the brain takes in goes through the limbic system first. And so there's always an emotion tied to every sensation. And in the primate brain, this is what you want to try to activate. This is where you're thinking and reflecting, and especially the prefrontal cortex of the thinking part of the brain. This is where you can actually think about your thoughts, all right? So brain function, here's how it works. The sensation fits first through your amygdala, then it goes to the limbic system, then it hits your neocortex. And what you're really trying to do here in leadership is you're trying to engage the prefrontal cortex as much as possible. And the research shows that 10 times more signals are actually going from your senses through your limbic system and all the way to the prefrontal cortex than signals going the opposite direction. And what you want to do is increase the flow of energy from your prefrontal cortex back to your amygdala in order to try to reverse the flow and to be able to control your amygdala so you don't experience this kind of amygdala hijack, where first of all you freeze, that's fear, or where you flee, that's a little bit of fear and some anger, or where you fight, that's where you get really angry. So your amygdala really senses whether you're angry or you're afraid and sends out these huge rushes of adrenaline as soon as the amygdala senses something in your environment that's threatening your survival, or something that they think is some kind of a threat to you is going to trigger this biological, chemical reaction in your body. So the research is showing that cell phones are not good. Okay, our obsession with technology is having a negative impact on our brains. They're very addictive. They heighten narcissism. They create more attention deficit. Okay, it's creating more obsessive compulsive behavior, and it's leading to fewer human interactions. This is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of neuroscience. They talk about the universality of facial expressions. What this means is that anywhere on the globe, okay? Anger, sadness, fear, happiness all look the same. Because what happens when your limbic system senses something out in your environment and translates that into being mad, sad, glad, or afraid, the brain right away triggers the muscular reaction in your face to either look happy or sad or angry, or fearful, right? And so these all of these emotions are intrinsically connected to chemicals in your brain that stimulate muscular changes in your face. And so you can read people's emotions by looking at their faces. And what happens is, and what I want you to do after this presentation is I want you to Google these chemicals, okay, and learn more about them, because all of this is directly related to practicing leadership and management, or followership for that matter, in the workplace. So you have serotonin. These are all. This is a chemical that releases positive energy through your body when you're feeling some kind of joy or excitement. Dopamine is another way of arousing the brain. It's linked to joy or to anger and fear. Okay, norepinephrine or noradrenaline. Okay, these are chemicals that can help deal with stress. Okay, so all of these chemicals are things that sometimes people take when they're feeling anxiety or depression. Okay, so the medications you might take can actually trigger this kind of chemical reaction in your body, from a pharmaceutical point of view. But there are ways of doing this naturally. So like, for example, walking in the woods, okay? Getting enough sunlight, listening to soothing music, singing with other people. These can all release positive chemicals in your body and increase the activity of your prefrontal cortex. Two other neurochemicals that I think are really important to this presentation are oxytocin, which is necessary to be present in order for there to be trust, and vasopressin. This is where you get sort of a sense of excitement and surprise sometimes in a relationship. Okay, so as a leader, you want to try to figure out ways that you can generate oxytocin and vasopressin and other positive chemicals into the leadership relationship. Okay, and all of this is due to the fact that the brain is a social organ. Okay, they call this the hyper-prosociality of the human brain. That our social relationships are actually having a dramatic impact on the way that our brain functions. And cooperation becomes something that's really critical to human survival. And the fact that we have this unique ability to collaborate, but that's what gives us purpose and meaning in our lives, okay? It's what separates us from other species in the animal kingdom. Bottom line here, folks, is that your brain is changeable. Things that you do every day, little decisions that you make about what you eat, how much you work out, what music you listen to, what movies you watch, all of these things are going to make a difference in terms of how your brain is wired and how well you'll be able to practice leadership and how well you'll be able to perform in the workplace, okay? One of the most important pieces, I think, of this presentation is really to be more positive, okay? Negative emotions in the workplace have a huge impact on the culture. Particularly, you need to be aware of the fact that when you're in a position of authority, your emotions are contagious. The more positive you can be, the better the culture is going to be for everyone, okay? So you need to give yourself positive messages. So let me go through real quickly here some ways that you can practice these 4 pieces of emotional intelligence, and then we'll wrap it up with this, okay? So self-awareness. Some of the ways that this book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, suggests to practice self-awareness: know what your buttons are. Know what makes you angry or afraid or sad, okay? Like, for example, if there's certain driving habits of other people, be aware of that, okay? Recognize when you're in a bad mood. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this kind of way? Notice what grabs your attention in music. If you're listening to the Bee Gees, you're probably sad, all right? Seek feedback from other people that can help you build your self-awareness. Self-control, just breathe. When something out there is just bothering you, something's hitting your triggers, just breathe. List what your emotions are saying, what your reasons are saying. Another way to think about it is what's your heart saying when you're making a decision versus what's your head saying. Make your goals public. They're more likely to be kept. Take a sip. That means, like, if you're in a meeting and someone is saying something that is upsetting you, take a sip of water and take a break before you actually say something that you're going to later regret. You have a major decision and are feeling very emotional about it, sleep on it. Don't make a decision, a major decision, when you're emotionally distraught, okay? Most people can only, the adrenaline from a strong negative emotional reaction is generally going to last only about 8 to 14 minutes, okay? Eventually, your body needs to generate more adrenaline. That doesn't mean you're not angry anymore, but the strong emotional and chemical reaction in your body won't last forever. So sleep on it. Take some time. Smile and laugh. Watch movies and listen to music that's going to make you smile and laugh, okay? Because the more positive you can make your environment, the more positive your brain's going to be, and the more positive your emotions will be. Focus on your self-talk, okay? These are the messages that you actually give, your mind gives to your brain, okay? This is called cognitive behavior therapy, okay? Cognitive behavioral therapy actually teaches you to give your brain more positive messages. So when you're under duress, to give yourself a positive message and sort of talk your way out of it, okay? Practice social awareness. Study body language when you're in a meeting. Try to pick up on, the emotions in a room by studying the way people are sitting. Take notes later, which means basically, when you're taking notes, you're taking your eyes off of a lot of the interaction in the room, okay? So maybe take notes later and study what's really going on in the room. Become a student of body language and what's being said. Ask the right question, but at the right time. Plan ahead for socials. So when you're going into a social, think about, remind yourself, okay, this person said that their wife was having surgery. Maybe I should ask about that. Listen to people without interrupting them. Try to live in the present. The biggest two distractions from living in the present are the past and the future, okay? We're either anxious about the future or we're worried about the past, and we got to try to focus in on the present moment. Go people watching, especially when you're traveling. Watch people, become a student of people and their interactions. And then finally, ideas to practice social skills. Call people by name. When somebody gives you their name, say it out loud and let it register. Put that name on the stage of your brain, if you will, for a moment so that you remember that name and you can call that person by name. Learn the cultural rules in a certain group. Listen carefully. And the best way you can demonstrate that you're listening is to summarize what the other person has said. Encourage other people to give you feedback on how you're doing. Reflect others' emotions. This means actually, when somebody else is feeling really angry, that you identify that. You say, you seem really frustrated right now. That's called a reflection. And when you're leading, it always helps to explain the why. Explain why this change is so important, and that'll help get through the emotions. All right, so this is all something that, we've just talked about for a half an hour, but this is something we have to think about every day. We have to continuously try to improve, all right? So it's not something you're going to just, hear this half-hour presentation, you're going to get better on it. You have to reflect on your own emotions, engage your prefrontal cortex, try to calm down your amygdala. That's really, in a nutshell, what the practice of leadership and emotional intelligence is all about. Quieting your amygdala and trying to awaken your prefrontal cortex. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dan. I just want to take a moment and thank everyone again for joining us today. I just want to quickly highlight that if you'd like to bring Dan in on this topic or any other topic, you can give us a call at Kirkwood Corporate Training at 319-398-5623, or you can send us an email at corporatetraining@kirkwood.edu. Dan, I loved how you mentioned that we're all capable of changing and we're all able to really become more self-aware, reflect, and control when we're starting to feel some emotions bubble up. So today was a great presentation, and I just want to again thank everyone for joining. For our Facebook Live viewers, thank you so much for joining us. I'm actually going to be ending your live stream now. As a quick reminder, if you register and attend via Zoom, you can actually stay on with us and participate in the Q&A with our trainers. For our Zoom folks, please go ahead and submit your questions. I know we've already had a couple come in, and we'll get to those in just a moment. All right. So Dan, we had one question come in, and they want to know, is everyone able to be a leader?
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe that anyone can practice leadership when you feel passionate about wanting to change something, and you begin to influence, invite, inspire others to join you in that leadership process. Yes, you can lead. It doesn't take a position of authority. It doesn't take a title. In fact, a lot of times positional authority gets in the way of leading because the temptation is to use your positional authority instead of actually leading, okay? When you're relying on your positional authority, you're not leading, okay? Leadership requires more intrinsic motivation, whereas authority, that's when you're using your extrinsic motivation. You're rewarding people, you're punishing people, or you're just controlling things, you're dictating things. That's not leadership, okay? Leadership has to be a voluntary, interactive process where everyone's involved and engaged in that relationship.
Very good, thank you. So another question we had come in was looking for some suggestions for helping manager coaching narcissists with positive change.
Oh boy. Well, do we have another half hour on that one, Kylie?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
So yeah, narcissism is, and it's interesting, isn't it, that the research is showing that narcissism is connected to our use of cell phones and our use of social media. So narcissism, first of all, just to explain what that is, it comes from the Greek word narcissio. And there's this Greek legend about Narcissio is this legendary figure who falls in love with his reflection, okay, in the water, and then eventually falls in the water and drowns, okay? That's Narcissio. So narcissism means self-love. It means being so enamored with yourself, okay, that you can't see the wisdom of others. I would say one way out of this, okay, one way out of narcissism would be to practice what we call the window in the mirror, okay? The window is where you look through a window and give credit to others when things are going well. And the mirror is where you look in the mirror and you take responsibility when things are not going so well, okay? It's all about attribution, okay? So narcissists want to attribute all the blame to others and all the credit to themselves. And leadership's about reversing that attribution tendency and trying to take the blame yourself and give credit to others. And when you do that, I think your reputation will shine, and it's a sign of real character, okay? So yeah, this is something that, developing character, okay? Developing character, practicing the virtuous life. That's really what you need in order to get over narcissism. It's really something, Kylie, that I'd have to spend another half hour answering. But what do other people think? How do you deal with people who are really narcissistic?
Yeah, that's a tough topic. So we had another question come in, and maybe that'll kind of help them find some more tips and tricks on how to deal with that. But we had a question that came in about kind of the opposite now, which is, what can you say about toxic or excessive positivity?
One more time.
What can you say about toxic or excessive positivity?
Topic or expressive I've never heard those particular.
Toxic positivity. So someone who's
positivity,
just,
I mean, yeah. That's really the key to emotional intelligence. And it's also key to a happy, productive, and healthy life, okay? And the research clearly shows this, that the more positive the energy in your brain, the healthier and the happier you're going to report as an individual. And so positivity is largely connected to having a healthy prefrontal cortex. And there's a lot of things we can do to develop the prefrontal cortex. Holding hands with someone you love, listening to classical music, watching movies that uplift you, or listening to music that's uplifting. Okay, if you're watching horror shows, all you're really doing is you're igniting your amygdala, okay? When you have an overactive amygdala, That's also called post-traumatic stress syndrome, okay? That's what PTSD does. It makes your amygdala overreact to threats that are in your environment. You want to do just the opposite. You want to calm your amygdala, and you want to increase the strength of your prefrontal cortex. Singing together with people at a concert or in a church, meditation and prayer. Okay, and I'm not just making this stuff up. This is all neuroscience. This is research based. Okay, actually breathing, meditating on your breath can actually increase the power of your prefrontal cortex. All these things can make you a more positive person, and this is really key when you're trying to lead, because okay, your emotions, your positivity are going to be contagious to everyone else. So when you walk in and you're in a bad mood, okay, because maybe you had an argument with somebody in your family before you left home, okay, that's going to taint the entire workplace, all right? So somehow being able to be aware of that bad mood and be able to set that aside, and that's what takes the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex actually, when you practice this well enough, the prefrontal cortex can actually, through self-talk, can reverse the flow of energy in your brain and talk your amygdala down off the cliff, settle it down. Okay, this takes time. It doesn't happen right away. Okay, and while you're doing this, you have to be aware of the chemical reaction that's going on in your body. You can't overreact with your behaviors, right? While you're doing all this stuff, it really takes a strong prefrontal cortex. And so all the decisions you make during a day really have an effect on how strong your prefrontal cortex is going to be and how strong your amygdala is going to be. One of the other little tips that I'll throw out there that, this is something my mother told me when I was a kid, and now neuroscience is showing that this is actually a really positive thing to do, is before you go to sleep at night, think about 3 things you're grateful for, or 3 things that happened that day that were, really good things. And the more you can try to put positive energy around memories that were good and that you're grateful for before you go to sleep, the more your brain is going to remember those things. Because when you're sleeping, when you get into REM sleep, that's when your brain is actually reconfiguring all the memories in your brain. And if you want the brain to basically put the positive memories up front of your theater, if you will, closer to the stage, so you can remember those better, then focus and reflect on those positive things before you go to bed at night. So the more you focus on the positive, the closer to the stage those positive memories will be. Okay, and the more easy access there is to getting them on the stage, and all of that basically reports out, makes you a healthier and happier person and a better leader.
So another question that came in, and we've gotten quite a few coming in. So guys, I don't want you to think I'm not seeing them. I promise I'll get to them here in a second. But one that came in anonymously to me was, so kind of building off of what you just said, at times when you're practicing empathy and really wanting to retain your talent with practicing empathy, if you show up with positivity in the wrong moment, that can be toxic. So how do you do you have any tips for how to navigate that, being empathetic, but trying to also maintain a sense of positivity in the workplace?
Yeah, you have to be authentic, right? So when like, for example, if you're at a funeral, okay, and everybody's somber and sad about the loss of this friend or loved one, you have to be authentic about that particular emotion at that particular time, and not start, talking about, this comedy that you watched last night or something. So yeah, so being appropriate, being mindful of what, what emotion the other person is going through, and trying to, identify and try to, get into that particular emotion. But then, yeah, a lot of times, really, one of the challenges is you're going from from one meeting to the next. And that's where it takes the self-awareness to realize, okay, now I'm going from this meeting where people were really sad to this meeting where people are really happy, and into this meeting where people are really angry, okay? And so, yeah, so the key there is self-awareness, and then being able to pick up on the emotions in the room. This is tough work. It's tough work. You're practicing all 4 of these, right? The self-awareness, the social awareness, the self-control, and then the ability to handle the emotions in the room. I wish we had more time for this, Kylie. I don't feel like I'm giving these questions enough consideration.
This is great. Thank you. So we have time maybe for two more real quick here.
Sure. I don't know if I've been that helpful, but okay.
This is a tough topic. It's a lot of things to kind of navigate. And like you just said, you're having to switch between all of them all at once and throughout the whole day. So it's tough. But the next question we had was, how can one discern if they are doing well in leading their own team? So how does one know if they're doing a good job in being an emotionally intelligent leader?
You know, Kylie, I'm glad somebody asked that question. I've actually just developed basically it's a leadership assessment that looks at the things that we've just been talking about. Okay, how you can assess your emotional, your dialogue, your communication, your listening skills, your inquiry skills, which is asking the right questions. So a colleague of mine, a friend and colleague, Randy Richards, and I have been developing this leadership assessment because I haven't really found a really good one out there. But there are also, they're costly, but you can get assessments to actually look at your emotional intelligence. Okay, there are, just go online. You can find all kinds of assessments out there to try to measure your EQ. Yeah, so Randy and I are developing our own right now. And if someone wants to email me, that I think my email address is right there on the screen, I'd be glad to share with you what we're doing.
Very good. Thank you. So last question for today's session. As a leader, can you engage anyone? So that employee that is constantly saying, this is just a job, doesn't really want to participate, maybe is negative, shares problems, but isn't really solution focused.
Yeah, that's a great question to end on, because I do want to I want to put a caveat on everything I've just said. Basically, that I don't want to oversell this material. What the things that I've been talking about today are none of us is going to be perfect at any of these practices. Okay, every day is a new opportunity to grow in emotional intelligence and to grow as a leader and as a manager and as a human being. Okay, what I've shared with you today is really ideas or strategies about ways that you can improve your odds. Okay, how you can, think about it in baseball terms. You're going to increase your batting average, if you will, right? But no one's going to hit 1,000. No one's going to be perfect on this stuff. Okay, the main thing is that we learn from our mistakes from one day to the next, because we're all going to make mistakes in this regard. Okay, the main thing is that we take time, reflect on our mistakes, and try to get better. Okay, try to get better, because and the other caveat here is that there's probably like about 20% of the workforce for which very little of what I've shared today is going to work very often. Okay, we have sociopaths out there, we have narcissists, as was mentioned, we have bullies, you have people who are clinically depressed, clinically anxious. So these strategies, these ideas are not going to work in every situation all the time. Okay, but they're going to increase your odds and make you a better human being. And with practice, you'll grow better and better every day, and you'll still make mistakes. And if you keep reflecting on your experience, you'll grow in wisdom. And that's really ultimately what we're asking you to do, is to reflect on your experience so you can become wiser and more humble and more virtuous as a leader. Because leadership is really kind of an inward journey, not just an outward journey. It's not just what we do, it's who we are as a human being and how we can practice our humanity. Thank you all very much.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. It was great having you back again and to share with us your thoughts on emotional intelligence. I loved ending on, it's okay to not be perfect. Every day is an opportunity to practice. So with that, thank you all for attending today. We will be sending out a recording as soon as I get closed captioning added, and we'll do some light editing. So just give us some time and you will get that recording. I will email it to you, and it will also be on our corporate training, the Kirkwood corporate training Facebook page, LinkedIn page, as well as our YouTube channel. Thanks everyone, and thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, everybody.